Tobi's Student Expert podcast. On this platform, Tobi will engage with student experts, their field of study, passions and interests. Meu nome é Bernardo Romagnoli Betônico. Meu campo de estudo é o corpo e minha expertise é a dança e a escrita.
Hello listeners, I'm your host Tobi and welcome to the fourth episode of the Student Expert podcast. I went to a screening of 3 LGBT films at the Margate Arts Club a while back. The films were the art film Busy by Tomas Jefanovas, an artist and graphic designer who I'll be interviewing, Just May Does Geri, featuring Pete May, a drag artist who has a passion for Geri Hallowell and who's also agreed to be in my podcast. The third film is Lucy, My Transgendered Life. I hope to be interviewing Lucy and the filmmakers at some point in the future. However, the film is very popular, so there's not much chance soon of engaging with them. At the screening, I engaged in conversation with Bernardo, who at the time was writing notes in a small book in between films. He introduced himself in his native Portuguese as a student of the body and of an expert of dancing and writing. The interesting thing is how he got to this stage, so please enjoy. We'll talk a little bit about why the body and that expertise.
Yeah, so I come basically from literature and linguistics studies, where I developed some kind of image of myself that was completely out of the body. Let's say it that way, because it was only about reading things intellectually. And when I started to read a writer called Gabriella Llansol, I changed my relationship with language and started to have this inspiration about the body. This was during my master's course, and it's something that has nothing to do with the academic way of approaching literature, and it was more about, while I was reading Gabriella, I started to dance.
Okay.
And I started 6-month intensive formation course in artistic research, that it was a lot about somatic techniques and dancing. It was more about creating discourse with the body, with movement.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I live in Lisbon now, because I'm with this group, this collective called Centro em Movimento, which is basically center in movement.
So you said that this woman's writing changed your relationship with language, is that right? How did she change your relationship with language?
I had very different feelings. I could feel fear, or I could feel like angry, or then I could feel that I was really in touch, like if someone was talking to me like we are talking now, like if she was present. Really intense contact with something that was always in movement, and this was her way of writing. If you go to her books, you find like a mixture of historical figures. She puts these figures in her everyday life, but in a way that they are not exactly historical, they are not characters. She refers to these historical figures as figures, not as characters. And she defines figure as something that it's always mutating. She doesn't write exactly stories. It's more the course of life.
Yeah.
Many books she called them diaries, but I think it's all one big writing. And she does this game calling some books diaries, just to have this, I don't know, evocation of the genre.
Yeah.
But I never thought I would do a thesis about this text, because it was something that I couldn't catch. I couldn't understand.
Right.
But I kept reading. It was more comprehensible through the when you have a door that is not exactly opened and you see only this part, you don't see completely. But she's not interested in showing things completely.
Is her technique in doing that more than others?
Yeah, she has when she received was a grant called Europalia she received for one of her books. She did this discourse which is called Para que o romance não morra. Literally is for the romance not to die. She's interested in renewing the contact between the reader and the writer, but not as reader and writer. She refuses these categories, and she uses different words in Portuguese. Like in Portuguese, reader you say leitor, and she uses legente, which has the same root, but it's the suffix she uses is an active one, like highlighting the active aspect of the reader through this word, but more in the sense of the encounter, not as someone who arrives in the text and starts to interpret that.
So are you saying that the way she writes is to have a kind of direct relationship between the reader and the writer?
Yeah, not only in discourse, but there you can find some definitions, but she's not interested in the abstract reader. I don't know what she's interested in, but the text is not interested in the abstract reader. It invites the reader to read as a gesture, not as interpretation, but this is my way of being with this text.
Can I pose something then?
Sure.
I assume you know of Roland Barthes, The Death of the Author?
Yeah.
So, in relation to this discourse, is it a response to anything like that? Or is it just her own expression? Is she responding to any notions of what the author and the reader are?
Yeah, you can do such relations by reading her texts. It's more about getting in touch with language. So I think Barthes is more interested in saying that the author is dead and then we can read him or her in the way we want.
And what you're saying is that the relationship that she's having with her readers, is more immediate. She's engaging directly with her readers. That's what you're saying. Yeah?
Some kind of strange community formed like through this language. And she puts Nietzsche, Munzer, Thomas Munzer.
Oh, okay, I don't know.
He was like a revolutionary priest who inspired a lot of people to rebel themselves against the church and was the Middle Age.
Is that what in the Middle Ages?
Yeah.
Right.
And Emily Dickinson.
And these are people that are within the discourse?
Yeah, they are within the discourse. Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa also. I don't know, I don't think I should be talking about Llansol this way. I didn't want to make an introduction to her work and I ended up doing this.
So if we go back to your field of study, so the body, she was the one that got you started in kind of changing your relationship to language.
Yeah, and she
language or writing or both?
Language and writing, because in this text reading is very close to writing, in the sense that you have to give yourself an experience. I think Maria Gabriella is radical in the sense that she puts this rupture in the form of the text. When you look at this, at her words, it's like full of empty places in the page, and then suddenly you can have some description, more like romance or traditional narrative, but everything gets connected through some kind of how do you say this? Like when you have thread. Yeah. That depends on you. And this was. I felt that this text was talking to me. Yeah. This thread was there for me to pull it.
When she's writing a text, do you see a clear beginning and a clear end? It sounds like she's doing something different with the historical figures, and with them changing their names within the text. That's not a text that you can read a clear narrative from one side to the other. How does she put those in the text?
So they are more like intensities that get into the images she's calling to the text.
Right.
And sometimes you can't actually know that, for example, Pessoa is in Fausta. In Fausta is a feminine figure that is Pessoa. It's not different. They are the same.
Okay.
But you can only know that reading other books. But she's not interested in this kind of
how do you know they're the same character then?
Most of the times you will not know. That's
Right.
very radical, I think. I I discovered that reading the critics,
Okay.
but the image, the intensity, the experience
Mm.
is there, even if you don't know.
Mm.
And she puts an end in the book, but it's not. It's like the figures. She doesn't want them to be dead or to have a traditional biography.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the book of the mutations, the I Ching, Chinese?
Oh, the I Ching.
I Ching.
The Tao Te Ching. Yeah, Llansol. Yeah. It's about
I
the-
Ching.
Yeah.
So in Portuguese we have a subtitle that is like the mutations book. So something that became an image for me when I worked in Llansol's archive, when I was doing the master's course, is that she never talks about I Ching in her work.
Mm-hmm.
But the I Ching was her pillow book.
Okay.
And this was a very strong image for me to understand this care she has with some historical figures and some writers in the sense of being mutants, you know. She wants reading to be renewing gesture.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Or,
So, what I've learnt from the I Ching myself, the I Ching says that you must go with the way. So you must, instead of trying to move a boulder like water, you go around the boulder. You don't change things, and I think that is true actually. That if there is the connection with the I Ching and these historical figures, what I'm seeing from what you're saying is that she recognises the change in relationship to historical figures.
yeah,
So at one point, kings and queens from Portugal, Italy, Spain, Britain, through the passage of time, the relationship with that historical figure changes and continues to change. Particularly in today's climate, where news is so easily accessible. So I suppose with modern media, the relationship to public historical figures can change almost instantly.
yeah. And I think what inspires this writing is that the Llansol is focused on the gesture that the figures she's choosing as something to be like continued, you know, not to be like worshipping the legacy, but to consider the gesture and how can you honor it somehow. And what I see really radically in what she's doing in these books is to invite the reader to be in this movement with her. What I felt really intensively. And then when I arrived to Portugal in 2009, I have already read like 3 books of Llansol in my undergraduate course with a crazy teacher. But I had this mixture of fascination and fear, and I wouldn't really propose to write about this text in a thesis.
Okay.
But then I met these people from Espaço Llansol, which is her archive. They are publicating her posthumous works, and they are organizing the things she left, and I started to work in there and to read the letters she received. It was not the letters she wrote, it was the letters that were there in her house of readers, critics, academics. And I started to see, like, from another side, because I was only organizing the letters, but I was organizing by subject, and I had this close relationship with the way people were reading the text, like since the 70s. And that was really something that touched me, in the sense that body, that Maria Gabriella Llansol, she was insisting in this writing. She was really insisting.
Okay.
She was not interested in likes, let's say. And then I started to see, like, this small community that was gathering around this text, and sometimes very close community, like sometimes you can see it as a church, or like it's small groups that have their, you can see it in every writer's work, like people defending their way of reading the text, and people following these ones who are defending, but this didn't change my interest in what I was hearing in her writing. So, the body not as an abstract subject or like biological field of study, the body as an experience. That for me started with language. So parting from my reading of Maria Gabriella Llansol, I started to read other things more or less like in the atmosphere that I started to garden there.
So were you told about this work, or did you just investigate yourself?
Other writings?
Yeah.
No, I was like, even things that I read before her, I could reread it and get other things, like from the atmosphere that I found in Llansol. And it was actually really about the body. And the body as something happening, as something always changing, as something that is not exactly the way you want or the way you want it to be. And how do you create a relationship with this? Like, not as something you discover only when you get hurt or you have some serious issue with it, but something you can discover in tiny details, and like his body. And how can you document it? Not only through writing or even taking photos. This is something that also interests me, not as a photographer, but as someone who is trying to create some intensities. We are always starting with the body. Something that is always in a constant renewing and a flux.
It was Bernardo's introduction as a writer that inspired me to ask him for an interview. His retelling of the effect that Maria Gabriella Llansol's writing had on him intrigued me, and I loved his response to Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author. Whatever the truth about the relationship between the author and their readers, it's clear that Bernardo believes that Llansol has a direct relationship with their readers and had a profound effect on him. At the same screening, I also met sailor drag artist, writer, musician, LGBT campaigner and comparative literature expert Tommy Poppers. In his episodes, starting on the 15th of October, he speaks about Gothic writing of the fin de siècle, engages with politics, international attitudes to gender and the creative artistry of the LGBT communities. Art is a form of communication for Tommy, so please listen out for him. Reviews for all these artists appear on my WordPress page that accompanies this podcast. Please like, subscribe and share from all of my social media sites, especially iTunes, Podbean and YouTube. You'll find the links to them on the show notes that accompany this podcast. It remains for me to say thank you to Bernardo and to you the listeners, and I'll see you next time.